Welcome to Blueprints for Liberty, Designing the Freedom Cities of Tomorrow. This is a podcast that explores the visionary concept of freedom cities and how we can create living environments that prioritize individual liberty, social harmony, and equal opportunities for all. We look back through history to see how the past informs the future and how people can self-organize in their communities to support self-sufficiency. We also look to develop leaders that are moral and ethical in a world that is spinning out of control. Tune in to be part of the conversation shaping the future of our communities.
Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm excited to have Sophia Demas on today. We're going to talk about something a little bit different than what we've talked about in other episodes, certainly related, but we're going to be talking about miracles. And she has written two books, The Divine Language of Coincidence and Consciousness Beyond Death. And included within those, she will share some of her own experiences and also what we both have found interesting in our conversation is a lot of times we look at miracles as things that happen either in a religious perspective, spiritual perspective, or something that we can't explain. And she'll get into a little bit about how scientists are actually kind of interested in what's happening. And I believe, based on some of my own experiences, that I wouldn't, in my own experience, and we can get into this discussion, that we can explain miracles, but more that I have never believed that miracles, and I'm coming at it from a religious perspective, that God doesn't just wave a magic wand and miracles happen. I believe that he works under the laws of nature and under his own laws, and within those, that miracles happen. And as we come to better understand him and how he operates, then it's easier for us to understand how miracles happen in our lives. And sometimes, if we are really in desperate need, not desperate need, but if we're in need of a miracle, how we can elicit his help to produce those miracles. So that's kind of the angle I'll be taking it. But Sophia is definitely willing and interested in kind of taking it her own direction. So I'll let her introduce herself and her books, and then we'll just get started.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me on. And I'm very curious to hear about your experiences as well. So a little bit about myself. I've had 3 successful careers. The first one was a decade as an architect, and that included working with a noted futurist, Buckminster Fuller, who invented the geodesic dome. And then I started a evening gown couture dress designing business, and that went on for fashion was 10 years. And then I went back to school and got my master's in counseling psychology when I was 50. And even though that these careers may sound sort of disparate, there is a unifying thread, and that is problem solving. And that's what turns me on, is to solve the problem. So I'm currently still working in my 3rd career. I designed a 12-workshop program created to increase self-esteem in at-risk women. So currently I am working part-time. My employer is the Salvation Army, and there's a residence that houses ex-trafficked women who can live there for 2 years for free, hopefully get some money together and get their own apartment. Women who had been trafficked who want to turn over a new leaf. And I'm the in-house counselor. And I can tell you it is a whirlpool of trauma. So that's basically my career background. But what happened is when I was 19, I was immersed in this existential angst, which I'm sure a lot of 19-year-olds go through. But they were these 2 issues that to me were unsolvable. And I just angsted over this. And in a very short period of time, within 4 months, took a meeting a man and having a dream that took care of these two issues. I mean, and I was transformed. I sort of glided into womanhood transformed, and that wasn't lost on me. So I thought, oh, it was almost like somebody up there was listening to me. And so what happened, I kept having these events that what I consider a miracle, I guess, is getting exactly what you need at just the right time. So this has been happening. And whenever I would tell a friend about my latest miracle, they would come back with this, oh, these things only happen to you. And it was kind of annoying because I know that these things don't just happen to me. And since I'm not special, I'm not a guru or a saint or anything like that. And then in 2000, it was 2011, and I never wanted to write a book. Actually, I did not want to write a book, but about 16 years ago, a medium told me that I was going to write a book, who just the idea that I met with this medium was strange in and of itself because I had no desire to go to a medium, but that's how the universe works. And I argued with her and I said, absolutely not. I said, that's not in the cards. I just found the idea very unappealing. And I said to her, I have nothing to say. And B, I'm a people person. And so there's no way I'm going to sequester myself and write a book. And she just listened to me. And then she said, word for word, she said, Spirit says when she's ready, there are many spirits here to help her and many hands on earth. And so in 2011, oh, and I also did not want to get married and I did not want kids. So I feel like, okay, I'm exercising my God-given free will. I don't want to do these things. And thankfully, I had my mind open ajar. So I was successfully single until I was 45. And then in 2011, and this is sort of a big year for me, I turned 60. And one of my mentors, Father Stephen, who to me is the closest thing to Jesus on earth, he's not only a priest, an Albanian Orthodox priest, but he also opened these shelters for homeless youth called the Covenant Houses, which are around Philadelphia, New York, New Jersey. And so I was having, we would have coffee like every other month. And for 8 years until he retired and moved to Florida. And he was coming over for coffee and he said, you know that girl that I told you about that landed in the shelter from? And I said, yeah. And he says, well, I'm going to take her to get her cap and gown. She was graduating from high school. She was at the shelter. And I thought maybe I would bring her over for coffee. And I said, sure. So he brings this girl over. I mean, just this beautiful girl. And I'm like, oh, how did you get to the United States? And she tells me, and then I asked another question. And then I was like, what? And Father Stephen just goes, I have an errand to run. I'll see you back here in an hour and 15 minutes. And he knew exactly what he was doing. So what I heard was abuse on every level, abandonment and re-abandonment. Anyway, long story short, we adopted her. So now Mother's Day is like my new favorite holiday, And now she's in Greece living with her Greek architect husband. She has 3 masters and happy. So I'm happy. And then so in 2011 also, that's when I met Eleni. And so I reconnected with a childhood friend. And I was telling her about my latest miracle. And she says, oh, God, Sophia, these things only happen to you. And something clicked. I thought, everybody has a miracle story or a sign from, a deceased loved one, but there's just way too many. And I meditated on it. And what I found after I started dissecting these miracles, they were preceded by a coincidence. And the key, once I discovered the key, that you can have a coincidence and go, oh, wow, what a coincidence, and let it go. and it remains a coincidence, or you can take action on the coincidence. And this goes back to what you said, Cheryl, about, God doesn't just, just heap on a miracle, although he has. Some I've asked for, and some just gifts, But okay, so basically from these experiences, what I have come to understand is that there's this divine intelligence. Okay, now I refer to this as God. Okay, so doesn't look like anything. It's just consciousness, and it's extremely wise. And this divine intelligence wants us to be happy and find our true purpose. So we are communicated. We have this personal relationship. It is there for everyone. We have a personal relationship with this, and so we're communicated from this entity via dreams, via coincidences, via meeting a stranger that says exactly what we need to hear at that minute. And then once we take action, we co-create with this divine intelligence. And then whether that day or 3 years down the line, you will get what you need. And so that's basically how I thought, okay, I need to communicate to people that you don't have to be an extraordinary person to experience extraordinary things.
Oh, that's lovely. And there's so much to unpack in there. It's like, oh, wow. And I think, bringing this down to a little more practical level, I'll just share, some things that happened to me that align with what you've just said. Is I grew up in a very typical normal household, and most people when they're young aspire to be doctors, lawyers, firemen, policemen, I don't know, something of, I guess, significance, or of service to other people. But my goal, and I started when I was quite young I wanted to be a flight attendant. And so I didn't understand what the qualifications were. I didn't understand a whole lot of things. But anyway, so when I turned 18, I started applying, and this was like in 1980, right around that time frame. And every 6 months, I would send out letters to and this is when you had to hand type all the letters on a typewriter. We didn't have computers. So this was quite an ordeal. I went to the library, we didn't have the internet, to find out all the addresses of all the major airlines out there and where to send a letter, and then they would send me back an application. Then I had to hand type all those applications and put a cover letter, and had to make sure there was no typos, no mistakes, no grammatical errors. We didn't have, all the tools that we have nowadays to do all that for us. So this was quite a significant task. And then sure enough, I'd get letters back, letter of rejection. And every 6 months for 3 or 4 years, I did this. And I wanted to get married and maybe have kids one day. I wasn't real excited to have kids, but hey, I was like, I wouldn't say it wasn't on my radar, but it certainly wasn't anywhere in the near future on my radar. And one day my brother was living in Guam, and his girlfriend worked for Air Micronesia. And she's like, oh, by the way, Continental Airlines is hiring. And she gave me the information to send him, So I did. I went and filled out my application, did all that kind of thing, right? And I don't know what possessed me, because I remember sending it to LA, and somehow I found out that their offices had been moved to Houston. But I don't know, it must have been through a series of phone calls. I don't know how I came up with the information that they were in Denver, and I was living in Wyoming at the time, that they were hiring. And I knew that when they hired, they did these group interviews from hotels, but I didn't know which hotel. So I just started randomly calling all these hotels in Denver around the airport. And they're like, yeah, sure enough, these people are here, And I'm like, oh, can I talk to them? And they're like, okay. I was like, wow, they're letting me talk to these people, you know? And so they talked to me, and the recruiter said, hey, if you can get here by tomorrow at 4, that's our last interview, group interview, you know, we'll give you an interview. And I was like, wow. So I hopped on the next plane down to Denver, and I went through the interview, and it was just the typical interview process. But coincidentally, guess who I got to ride with they were on their way back to the airport to go back to Houston, and I happened to be on the same shuttle to go back to the airport to fly home, which meant I got to talk to them in person. You know, and so it was like, oh wow. And I, you know, did my little follow-up letter or whatever. And this is in the days when we got telegrams. And I got a telegram. I'd never gotten a telegram in my whole life. And this telegram said, oh, by the way, we're inviting you to flight attendant training. You've been hired. And I was like, oh my goodness, I was just, you know, crazy excited. I was like, okay. So I packed my bags and moved to Houston, went through flight attendant training, and I won't go into all the details, but it was the hardest 6 months of my life. I mean, the job was just not what I was expecting. I came after deregulation. The airlines were in turmoil. There was so many people on strike. So all of the, you know, the leadership who knew what was going on and how to run an airline were on strike. And there was all the rest of us scabs who just, and that's why I got hired, you know, we're kind of fumbling in the dark trying to figure all this out. And I was just working and working and working, and I got really sick. And I remember I was like, I finally had a Sunday off, and I went to church, and I was sitting on the back row of church, and I was just, you know, like crying to myself and feeling sorry for myself. This dream that I'd had was not at all what I thought it was going to be. It was not what I was expecting. And it very clearly said to me, you know, I got this, I wouldn't say it's a voice that I heard audibly, but you know, that I was married at the time, that I needed to have kids. And I was like, oh, no, that's not on my radar. That wasn't the answer I wanted to hear, right? And, you know, I had some female issues. We won't go into all of those, but I was like, okay. So it was like, just, you know, go off your birth control pills. And, you know, the doctor told me it would be at minimum 6 months to 2 years before I got pregnant. If I didn't, you know, and I was like, okay, I'm fine with that. I was hoping for at least the 2-year mark, you know. Well, sure enough, the next month I was pregnant. But I remember the day I brought my son home from the hospital, I was just literally like sobbing and in tears. And there was a song that I played you know, that was playing. And I was like, I have never in my life been so happy. And you know, can say it was hormones, you can say whatever. But after that time, I ended up having 4 kids. And I just remember that being a time in my life, my kids are grown and gone now, where I was like the happiest I'd ever been. And then I just thought to myself, I thought, because I know everybody views either God or this divine existence as they define it differently, but I look at him as my true father in heaven. And I thought, he clearly knows me a lot better than I know myself. I thought that, yes, I knew what I wanted for my life, and clearly I was wrong, and he was right, and he knew what was best for me, but I had to let go of what I wanted. So I'll let you run with
Okay.
that.
Okay, I have to piggyback on something here.
Mhm.
But first, I want to take a break. You froze for some time,
Oh, okay.
and I kept going, can you hear me? Frozen. And then you came back on, but you hadn't heard me, just so you know.
Okay.
Okay, so I have to piggyback on this
Mhm.
story because, first of all, you kind of confirmed what I was saying earlier about this divine intelligence knowing what we need better than we do. Okay, so what you hit on was my gratefulness for obstacles. So, I mean, how many times have I desired something really badly? And one obstacle happens after the other. It's like these red flags slapping you in the face. And you went through a litany of them, a litany. I mean, all the way to actually even being sick, but you kept doing it because no, you've got your little free will, and you were going to be a flight attendant come hell or high water. And then it was finally, you weren't listening, and then the voice came and you heeded it. And that is the key. The key is that you took action. You stopped taking your birth control. You had some level of faith there. And do you know how many times, it's like, God, why are you doing this to me? And how many times I have thanked God for those obstacles. And this was just a wonderful example that you gave.
Oh, thank you. And, just briefly, I will say that was only the beginning of the multitude of challenges that for the next 10 or 15 years of my life were just one after another. But when I look back and the book that I wrote, is about faith, I just see God's hand, and like you, I've had so many people say to me, like, and they were being very facetious, but it's like, you can just pull, a rabbit out of a hat, you can just, you pull off these miracles like they're magic. And I'm like, no, it's not me, number one. And number two, it's that, like you said, I'm listening. I'm seeking out that voice and I'm looking for that divine intervention. And I'm willing to put my own self aside and say, okay, I learned a long time ago that you know better than I do what's going to make me happy. And so I'm going to run with your plan instead of mine.
Exactly. And actually in the book, the first book, The Divine Language of Coincidence, I sort of present sort of my view on a spiritual of a spiritual journey. So I have 3 stages. So the first stage, I call it sort of operating from the perspective of wishful thinking. Okay, so you go around wishing for something, the stranger comes by and says the right thing, the dream comes by, the coincidence comes by, and you go, oh, wow, what a coincidence. Oh, wow, that was interesting. And you keep wishing and you keep wishing and you don't take any action. So then you kind of graduate into the perspective of hope. So now you got it. Okay, so now this happened. So I'm going to take action and hopefully I will get what I need. And this is kind of it's a difficult place, especially at first, the perspective of faith. And when you're in this zone of faith, you don't worry about anything. I mean, if something bad happens, well, okay, so I wasn't supposed to do this. And then bam, here comes the miracle. And whenever I tell my best friend, and she always says, why are you always so amazed? You wrote the book. And I'm like, I am amazed every single time. And so you brought up the scientists. And so I knew that scientists studied consciousness. But I had no clue that there's scientists that study coincidence. And somehow I got connected to this outfit in the UK called the Scientific and Medical Network. Your listeners should look this up because it's a group of eminent scientists that study, these paranormal phenomena. And so I've been invited to join this group, and I'm the only non-academic, non-scientist in the group, but they treat me like a peer. And I figured out, well, you know what? They need me as much as I need them because I need them to kind of validate my experiences, but they need me, Miss Little Ordinary Lady over here, to validate their research. See, she's a little nobody and look what happened to her. This is what we research. So this is so interesting. Okay, so The scientists that were interested in the first book did not want to touch the second one with a 10-foot pole, the consciousness beyond death, because there was just so many events that happened when I wrote the first book that I just pulled all the ones that had to do with death and after death communication, and then, included them in my second book. So these scientists, they can write about their near-death experiences, and others near-death experience, NDEs, because they have been studied for decades. But this, I'm not touching this. Well, I received, the executive director of this scientific and medical network sent me 2 articles he had co-written about after-death communication. And just before my book was released, the second one, a new scientific field emerged, after-death communication, ADC. So now I'm kosher, and now they're interested.
Yeah, it's always interesting. And, I have, I don't know if you want to call it mixed feelings. I want to jump back to my story, though, just briefly, because I think it illustrates a point that will lend itself to the future conversation here. Is one of the things that I learned from my experience is that what if I had never become a flight attendant? What if I had just, gotten married and had kids? I think there would have always been this part of me that would have felt like I had missed out. Like but I believe that, God gave me the opportunity to become a flight attendant so that I could find out this isn't really what I want. So sometimes I think we get what we want just simply to help us better understand that we don't know everything there is to know out there. And that's where I was talking to a friend of mine last night, and I was like, if you would have asked me about some of these topics, not so much about miracles and faith, because that's been a part of my life since I can ever remember. But, when we talk about a medium, or we talk about, consciousness beyond death, I was like, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, I would be just like those scientists. I'd be like, I don't believe in that. I don't agree with that. But oddly enough, my father, and I won't go into his story too much, he had a couple of near-death experiences, but one that was very serious. He was an electrician. He worked in an industrial capacity, and he had asked his apprentice to go flip the power off, which he didn't do. And my father cut into the cable, which certainly, had severe negative consequences, and he ended up in the hospital. And, but he never really, he wouldn't talk about it. He would never talk about it till very close to the very end of his life. And all he said is that something to the effect that there's something beyond that is so much greater and so much better than what we have here. And I'm not sure why he never chose to engage. He admitted that he had near-death experiences, but he never chose to, share them with other people. But then I just recently interviewed a woman who she wrote a book about the metaphysical Thomas Jefferson, and she engaged with the medium, and she didn't believe in mediums, too much prior to this, and, believed that she communicated with Thomas Jefferson and asked him questions and brought information back. And I was kind of intrigued, but I was like, I'm not sure I believe that really happened. But then I have to step back and I have to ask myself, why don't I believe that? If I believe that miracles only come in the form that I expect them to come in, and from the way that I expect them, then am I limiting the power that God has to communicate with me and to bless my life?
Well, okay, so now also I want to make it very clear that this book, the first book, The Divine Language of Coincidence, I did not write this book to convince anyone of anything.
Yeah.
Basically, this is what has worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
So what I have learned is to put out ask. Okay. So because it's a memoir, basically. So my experiences are mostly chronological. There are 2 chapters in the book. One is titled Please, which is prayer. And the other one is thank you, which is gratitude. And when you ask, you're having a conversation, you're having a personal relationship with this divine intelligence. So I ask for what I want, but I have learned to add on to that or whatever is best.
Yes.
So I want the red Ferrari, but I may not, maybe I shouldn't have it. So whatever is best. And that yields a lot. And I also believe that gratitude is the highest form of prayer. And so exactly what you were saying is, I said it earlier. I did not want to get married, did not want children, did not want to write a book, but I was open enough to pay attention and then to not only get what I didn't want or I thought I didn't want, but like you, I mean, I am sublimely happy with my life, sublimely happy. And because I've had such a wonderful life, loving parents, a cheery little childhood, I feel obligated to help people who have not. And that is my payback, for all these wonderful things. But, I have a couple of examples, sort of what I would consider miraculous. And if I could share,
Sure.
I would say, I don't believe that one, let's call it miracle, is bigger or better than the other. I mean, there were a couple that happened just before my wedding that it's just bizarre. Okay, so here are two nice little coincidences that yielded exactly what I needed. So Frank and I decided to get married on 4th of July, and we picked the 4th of October to get married. Now that's 3 months. Like the venues were all taken, bands were all taken. I thought, I don't care, even if it's a warehouse. I have a friend who's a wedding planner. She'll make it nice. And then I was notified by one venue that was very expensive that there was a cancellation. And I thought, okay, if worse comes to worse, okay, I just didn't want to pay that kind of money. So I call up my friend Anne, and a man answers that's not her husband. And I said, hello. I said, is Anne there? And he said, Sophia, is that you? It's Jerry, you called me. I mean, look, I'm really late for a meeting. I just came out of the shower. Can I call you later? And I'm like, what? And I just said, you have to promise me you're going to call me back, okay? I knew this guy just socially. Somehow he recognized me by my voice, which I think is strange in and of itself. And I just made him promise to call me back. And I said, before you go, what's your number? So he tells me his number, and I had misdialed by one digit, the last digit. So he calls me back. And as a result of this coincidence of getting somebody else in Philadelphia on the phone that I know because of a wrong number, he owned the Barclay Hotel at the time, which is this grand, old, beautiful, old world hotel that's now condominiums. And he gave us the ballroom for free, and then threw in the 2 nights in the presidential suite. In return, I had to invite him and his girlfriend to our wedding. Okay, so that's one. And then you can tell me which one you think is weirder. So the other one, so I get a call from this woman who tells me that she found my driver's license. So it was wintertime, and I go into my pocket, and I don't like to carry bags in the winter. So my license is not there. So she wanted to know how she could get it back to me. We find out she's only 2 blocks away from me. I said, just put it in my mail slot. Thank you very much. Okay. So she writes a very nice note about how she loves Oregon because I had an Oregon driver's license. And so that was that. Okay. So 2 months later, I get another call from the same woman. And she says, I know this is going to sound a little strange, but I just found your ATM card. Now, I can tell you, that's not my MO. I don't lose my cards, but there was this one ATM that, would keep your card until the end. No, it would spit it out. That's the one I used. It would spit it out. And so I went to another ATM where it kept the card until the end, and it said, "Would you like another transaction?" Well, I thought I had the card, so the next person could just wipe out my bank account. But it was her. She was the next person on this ATM. And so she said, "Should I, put it through your mail slot?" I said, "Oh, no, we have to meet. We have to meet." And so she came over to my studio, and I had this hand soap from Oregon to thank her. And as a result of this very bizarre coincidence, she was a concert violinist, and she got her friend who played the classical guitar, and she did this for our wedding present. They played my favorite Concierto de Aranjuez, while I walked down the aisle.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know which one is. And I'm like you. I think oftentimes people just think, oh, this is fate. Oh, this is just, a lucky coincidence or something like that. But my own personal experience is that when I don't acknowledge the hand of God in these things, and when I don't express gratitude, then these things have a tendency to go away.
Oh,
And
that's interesting.
yeah, because I feel like, I guess as a parent, if my kids, and not that you expect gratitude from your kids, you don't, but if they, aren't grateful for the things that they've been given, you feel less inclined to want to give them more because you feel like they're not appreciative, and that, they might take things for granted. And I think, maybe I have no idea. I just postulating in my own mind that maybe God feels that way. He's like, if you're not going to acknowledge my hand and appreciate what I've done for you, why should I continue doing this?
See, and I concur completely. So I find myself thanking God all day long. And then with my work, to hear such awful stories. I mean, just, like, like a woman whose mother trafficked her when she was 10. I mean, just these horrific. And why have I been so lucky? Why have I? I mean, and again, I just say thank you, and I'm just obliged. So I gave you these two kind of cute little miracles, okay? But here's now another one. And this was a 3-part miracle. So early in my relationship with my husband, Frank, I found out that he was a rager. He raged. Like I would, make an innocent gesture, and then he would take it that I was demeaning him in it, with his childhood issues. And I understood this. And then he would just be so apologetic, but after like 3 days, and so long story short, I finally thought, enough of this. Bye-bye, because I can leave, okay? So I moved out and moved in with a friend. And it got to the point, because we did have some communication, where I decided that I never wanted to lay eyes on this jerk ever again. Okay. And it was the day that I had my friend's divorce attorney's card in my hand, that I just was feeling free, and I don't know, are you familiar with A Course in Miracles?
Yep.
Okay, so this has been big in my life. And I write about how I coincidentally tripped on it many times and refused to read it. It was like a year and a half. I just slapped me. This book kept slapping me in the face, and I refused to, because it looked too much like the Bible, and I didn't want to, And anyway, so I was forced to read this book. Okay, that's another story. That's in the book. And so I thought, oh, I am now ready to open up my book and, see what guidance I'll have. Because every time I just randomly opened the book, I would get this incredible guidance. And the chapter was titled The Healed Relationship. And I'm like, oh, I don't want a healed relationship. But the rule is I have to read. whatever it is. And I found myself debating the book. Like, it would make a statement, I go, oh no, but you don't understand. This is how it's been for me and how tough it's been. And then I would say something to counteract what I just thought. And I'm just beside myself. This book and I are having this. And what I got out of it was God is in everyone. And if your brother comes to connect with you with his hand outstretched and you say no to your brother, you're saying no to God. I'm like, oh God, oh geez. So I thought, okay, I have nothing to lose. If he calls, I will see him. So that was the first thing that had to do with the book. So next day he calls me and he wants to get together. So I had just been fresh off this little lesson. So I said, okay. And when he came over, I remember saying to him, and I had him seated across the dining room table. I didn't even want to, I didn't even want that space. And I said, I want you to know that the only reason that you're sitting in front of me is because of a miracle. And he said, well, I have a miracle for you too. Now, this is not his lingo, okay? And I'm like, huh? And as he's saying this, he's taking off his wedding ring. And he told me that Sunday, he was cleaning out our fountain, and it has a big cement column that weighs a ton. And he goes, it fell on my hand. And I shoot a glance at his hand that should be hamburger, but there's just this bruise and a little scratch. And he removes his wedding band, and it had taken the brunt of the weight and saved his hand. I needed something that dramatic to disarm me, that dramatic. And so we started to see each other. And then the third incredible, I'm not going to tell you, because you have to read the book.
Oh, of course.
Find out.
Yes.
So the third thing that happened was because of a book that, we were going to Hawaii. At this point, we're back together, going to Hawaii. And so I could be the matron of honor at my best friend's wedding for the third time. And so it was a book that I read on the plane that I felt it was a mistake. I wanted to bring another book, but this book, I had it, so I had to read it. And as a result, the author, who was a kinesiologist, lived in Maui. Not only lived in Maui, but Kihei Road. Her address was Kihei Road, where our condo was. And she did a reading for each of us. And I don't know whether it was the reading or the fact that I decided to trust Frank enough to have him come with me, because he had, sabotaged all these romantic getaways. But that was in 2009. And not only has he not had one episode since, but he's transformed. He is spiritual. He's a believer. I am married to my dream companion. Now, so I wanted to contrast the two little wedding miracles, because I said that one isn't bigger or better than the other. But I do consider my marriage saved to be more important. So, but how many times I thank God for this every single day. Every time I wake up with them, I thank God, so, if people have asked me, like, well, these things happen to you, but they don't happen to me. But if you really sit back and analyze some of these highlights in your life, well, what if you hadn't gone into that restaurant to meet that person? What if you hadn't asked for directions from this person and then ended up, hearing exactly what you needed? Or you would be surprised what you would discover about what has been communicated with you.
Yeah, I agree. I think to kind of, finish this off a little bit, I think it's important that we, number one, acknowledge them. And number two, that we, when I say acknowledge them, I mean not just write them off to fate, but one of my goals, and not because I want to minimize or try to erase the majesty of God and his power and the things that he can do, but the more I have tried to understand how these miracles play out in my life, the better able I am to, and I hate using this word, but to channel them in a way that, like you, because I can't just say, it's not like, Christmas where I make my list to Santa Claus, here's everything I want, or, a genie, here's my 3 wishes. You do have to recognize that there's a process, and that process may look different for you than it does for me. But there's still a process, and there's still an acknowledgement that, to me, the most important part in in my book, talks about a lot more miracles too, is letting go. And like you said,
Well,
the book, The Course of Miracles, it's like, I didn't want to listen to this. I wasn't, it wasn't like I was, but it's when you let go that the miracle is allowed to happen.
Well, I have lived by the mantra. My friend is like queen of AA, and
Mhm.
she has these wonderful slogans. And that is what I live, let go, let God.
Yes.
And that's the operative secret. But also what I think is so interesting is now that these scientists are on board, especially like with this, with the synchronicities. So I was invited to help plan and participate in the Synchronicity Summit. This is the Scientific and Medical Network. And it was so well received that they invited people to submit an essay, and mine was accepted, and it's going to be in this new book that hasn't yet been published,
Mhm.
and that title is The Playful Universe.
Ooh.
So now I'm
Okay.
chapter 17 with all these like PhDs, and they all have to, because they're all PhDs, so they have to cite
Mhm.
all their information, but I don't.
Don't. Yeah. I know. Isn't that wonderful?
So yes, it's wonderful that, I mean, it seems that you really have come to the same conclusions.
Yeah. And maybe that's a miracle in and of itself. And so go ahead and share with people once again the titles of your books, but I'll have links to them in the show notes so that people can certainly take advantage of that and read them, because I strongly encourage people to. We live in a world that's in chaos right now, and I think we're in desperate need of miracles, more so than we ever have been. And I think it will just enhance each of our lives if we can take that opportunity. So if you want to take a minute, Sophia, to give them how they can contact you and the names of your books. And thank you so much for taking your time with us today.
Oh, well, thank you. So my website is my name, sophiademas.com. And I suggest that people go onto my influencers page.
Mhm.
And there's 8 people that I have had personal contact with that I consider to be mentors, one of which is Father Stephen. And I would love people to read, if you just read one blurb, to read about Abbess Emiliani, who you can't miss her. She's this nun who runs a monastery in Maryland. And it's a firsthand account of bilocation.
Mhm.
Especially if you're into mysticism. And then the first book is The Divine Language of Coincidence. And the second one is Consciousness Beyond Death. And I can assure you that, when you were saying even 5 years ago, you didn't believe this, there's no way that any of this could happen, these communications with departed loved ones. I'm just going to leave you with one that just happened. So it's not even in the book. So about 4 months ago, I lost one of my longest, dearest friends, Pushpa. And we visited her in India. And anyway, she's just a world traveler, global person. And she got her PhD here at University of Pennsylvania. And she just died. And I was so fortunate that 2 days before, I had this wonderful FaceTime visit with her where she told me she loved me and I was her sister. And she just had a heart attack and just died. So about 3 weeks ago, I'm thinking of her because I will miss her laugh and her cooking terribly. And I said, in my mind, I said, Pushpa, if anybody's going to give me a sign, it's you. I said, but maybe it's too soon. Maybe it's too soon. So take your time. And when you're ready, I would love to hear from you. The very next day, I got a friend request on Facebook from my friend Pushpa.
Oh,
Now, I mean, that's happened before where I get a friend request from somebody who's already a friend, but after like over like 500 friends, I get a friend request from her. So, and that's what this whole book is about. So when we die, we just shed our bodies and we are as aware as everyone listening is right now, and you and I. So that's how I'm going to end it.
that was a great note to end on. Thank you so much for your time today. And I look forward to hopefully future conversations. And I'll
Thank you.
definitely go to your influencer page. That sounds very interesting.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.